Chapter 5. I finished my work in the hydroponics and headed to the computer room to do some schoolwork. We had the best computers, of course. At least, they were the best available when we entered the compound. Dad had started his company on his own, building computers, and he still created prototypes for new ones, each better than the last. I could only imagine how many millions of dollars the latest model would have made. It was weird sometimes to think about money when there was no need for it in the compound. I guess I'd always been tuned into it, though, knowing we had so much. Our computers were loaded with educational software, all programmed to work at the user's pace with an infinite level of endless subjects. Although I had just turned 15, I was on my first year of college essays, or studies. This wonder boy was gifted in math and science, big shocker there. Plus, I still studied Mandarin. Lexi was on her first year of college, studying literature and Greek. I'm pretty sure she would have been a vapid socialite in the old world. But in the compound she studied, but only the subject she liked. She refused to do any math or sciences, and Dad let her get away with it. Perhaps he thought it was a waste of time nurturing the other areas. Most likely, Lexi just got her way with him once again. I spread my books out on the table, wondering what it actually would be like to study in a room full of people, to only have a small allotted space, not the entire room as I did. I never had to tell anyone to pipe down so I could concentrate, that's for sure. A word problem in calculus was totally confusing me, so finally I gave in and decided to ask Dad for some help. His office was set apart from the rest of the rooms down a private alcove, and always locked up tight whenever he wasn't there. I'd never been inside. I reached his office and knocked on the door. It clicked open. He must not have shut it tight. He's likely just stepped out for a moment, knowing none of us usually were around his office at that time of day. Dad? No answer. I pushed the door a bit with my foot. I took another glance down the hallway to make sure it was empty, and then stepped onto the threshold. The smell of pipe tobacco hit my nose as my quick gaze absorbed the decor. A rush of déjà vu flooded me as I realized the office was identical to Dad's office in our house in Seattle. A thicker coating of dust on the stack of old National Geographics was the only thing that was different. A huge chair and wheels still sat behind the richly polished panel desk. Three separate flat monitor computers, a wall of clocks with several time zones, and his favorite Seattle Seahawks football film. Everything almost nearly the same, except for the padlocked door on the far side of the room. Eli? I'm sure I looked guilty when I twisted towards him, but I tried to be casual. Dad, hey, I just need to ask you something. What the hell are you doing in here? His frown was fierce. My words stammered out. I wasn't doing anything. He looked beyond me into the office like he was making sure everything was still there. You're not allowed in here. I took a breath and stated in an even tone, I wasn't even in your office, Dad. I just need your help. I held up a notebook revealing scribbled equations. Oh. He waited for me to pass by him into the hallway. Better than anyone else, Dad understood the need for me not to be touched. Not that he'd ever really been a touchy-feely type anyways. He shut the office door behind him, tight this time. Let's take a look. Back in the computer lab, I explained how I tried to solve the problem, unsuccessfully. Dad rubbed his chin and squinted at my writing. Did you convert it to math? I held up my notes. That's what I'm trying to do. The quantities aren't fixed. Did you name them by a variable? I shook my head. I didn't get that far. Let's try a similar one. He jotted down a complicated equation. His mind seemed to work so fast that his fingers couldn't keep up. I tried to solve for x but couldn't figure it out. Dad being so close made me nervous, not able to think straight. Come on, Eli, think. He solved it as I watched. You can do this. The answer dawned on me, and I smacked my forehead with one hand. Stupid. That was one of my first ideas, but it didn't seem right. Dad shrugged. You should have gone with your first instinct. It's usually right. He stood. I need to get back to work. After Dad left, I had trouble concentrating on the rest of my studies. Why was Dad so freaked out about me in his office? Before we came here, he was working on new software or new computer designs. He was doubly cautious about security. But why would he be paranoid down here? Who was I going to tell? And what was behind that locked door? Other than the room behind the yellow door, I toured the entire compound so many times I knew every room. Or so I thought. At first I'd assumed our close proximity over the past 6 years would have made me feel closer to Dad. He no longer had the huge demands of his company. In the old world, our time with him had been scheduled as if it were an appointment written down on some shiny black book. We had dinner as a family at 6 every night, spent an hour or so in the library den, maybe played a game or something, then at 9 he bid us adieu and headed off to his study. Nothing had really changed that much. He still did exactly what he wanted and none of us questioned him. Maybe the hardest fact to swallow was that despite him being my father, I didn't know any more about the man than the general public might find out by reading his biography. Rex Yanakakis, adopted as a baby, then orphaned when he was 19, used his genius mind and inheritance to get a degree in computer science at MIT, and then start his own company. Not wanting to forget his roots, he supported the orphanage he'd been sent to as a baby. They ended up naming it for him. Quite a slick move, I'd say. It basically guaranteed his continued generous support. At age 27, when his company was already on its way to the top, he saw my mom play in the Seattle Symphony and didn't stop sending her white roses by the dozen until she agreed to see him. I can imagine the situation was attractive to her. To be raised with hardly any money, then grow up to be courted by one of the richest, most powerful men in the world? I'm sure the thought of a life with that kind of security had to hold a huge appeal. They got married, built a 30-room estate overlooking Puget Sound, immediately adopted 1-year-old Lexi from the Yankakis Home for Children, then had 3 kids the regular way. They lived the sweet life, happily ever after and all that crap. That's the Rex Yanakakis the world knew. What Rex Yanakakis did I know? My dad was never one of those dads you could ask for a quarter if you saw a gumball machine. Instead, he had one of those black American Express cards not available to the general public. Gumball machines didn't have slots for those. My dad was never one of those dads who raked a pile of leaves to jump in with their kids. He worked long hours most of the year, so his idea of quality time was a 2-week trip twice a year, usually to somewhere exotic like Tahiti or Morocco. And there was usually another reason for going, like the time he acquired the software company in Rabat and bought an uninhabited, uncharted island in the South Pacific. Our vacations always included some kind of business transaction. Except for the last trip, a camping trip, the one that ended with us coming here to the compound. We just happened to be on Dad's 3,000 acres in eastern Washington when our nation was attacked. Even though Dad always told us the compound could be reached by helicopter from our estate in under that ubiquitous 40 minutes, I thought that was cutting it a bit close. I remember thinking how lucky we were to be in the cabin with our RV so close to the compound we had heard so much about right as the nightmare began. But we were not lucky that we were away from the cabin, a ways away, when we discovered Therese had smuggled a stray kitten into the RV. We were not that lucky when Eddie's allergies flared up. Not lucky that his medicine was back at the cabin. Not lucky that Graham had to drive back to the cabin in the Range Rover to get the medicine while the rest of us went to bed. Not lucky Eddie climbed in the back of the SUV without anyone knowing. And definitely not lucky that some country decided that moment was the right one to launch a nuclear attack, sending us careening across the flat landscape in the RV. The rest of it comes to me in a series of black and white flashes. Dad slamming on the brakes, grabbing Therese. Dad shouting at the rest of us, "Get out! Run, run, run!" Following behind him in the dark, stumbling over rocks in the middle of nowhere. Mom running too, helping us up. The night, so dark, chilly. My family simply maniac. Manic shadows alongside me, stopping at a hole in the ground. Not a hole, a hatch. Dad pushing us, making us climb down. Dad staying on top. Me screaming for Coco. Dad promising to find her. Me going with the others, down into a room, stairs. So many stairs. Descending, 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 to the silver door, the gaping mouth wanting to swallow us, waiting, waiting, precious minutes ticking. Too much time. Mom leading us through the silver door, Dad returning, me screaming, silver door closing, loud, reverberating in my head, Graham gone, Eddie gone, world gone. That wasn't all of it. My mind censored out the worst part. The part where I was selfish. The part where I would do anything to get what I wanted, even if it meant leaving my brother out of our only hope for survival, our sanctuary. My dad was the type of dad who spent $1 billion on that sanctuary so his family could survive a nuclear attack. That should have been enough for most people. Problem was, I never had been most kind of people. I would have rather had a dad with change jingling in his pocket, one who would have spent the last 40 minutes of the world raking leaves for his kids to jump in, so that they perished in one loud, bright instant, giggles still bubbling up from their bellies, never suspecting a thing. Yeah, well, tough luck, rich boy. Chapter 6. My dreams that night, like so many other nights, were of food. cheeseburgers loaded with bacon and mayo and ketchup, seasoned curly fries, greasy and dripping in mustard, milkshakes, thick slices of strawberry cheesecake, hot fudge sundaes. When I woke up, my pillow was wet with drool and my stomach growled. I hated waking up like that, immediately reminded of our pathetic food situation. It hadn't always been so bad. In the beginning, we had plenty to eat. An enormous open room near the hydroponics housed the poultry and livestock. Without Eddie to do the job, caring for them fell to me. We had 5 Holsteins, all with suckling calves. With their soft fur, slippery noses, and sandpaper tongues, the calves were so lovable that it helped me not miss Coco so much. Their pen was a smaller version of a corral you'd see on a ranch, smelled like one as well. Every day, wishing I could worm my way out of it, I grudgingly held my breath as they scooped up their manure and hauled it to one of the incinerators. I gave the animals water and then carried grain by bucketfuls to their trough. The trough sat near a water tank that I filled with a hose from a nearby spigot. The chickens were not as fun as the cows. I sprinkled their corn, brought clean water, and rushed to the henhouse. I hated the putrid stench of chicken crap. Most days I gathered eggs. Those were a treat, especially when Mom made them into cheese omelets. Our entire room of the storehouse was devoted to feed for the animals. Should it dwindle, Dad explained, we would butcher the cows and make do without milk and cheese and butter that Mom made. Even though it would mean less shoveling for me, I chose not to think about that day, counting on the feed to last. Between the dairy and poultry products, produce from the garden, and freezers full of meat, we ate well for the first 7 months. The morning it all changed started out like any other. Life had become routine, almost like we'd always lived in the compound. With an orange wheelbarrow, I hauled a new bag of feed out of the storeroom and poured into the cows' trough. They dug in with gusto as usual, the calves nursing as their mothers chewed, their crunching loud. The chickens were ecstatic when I fed them, their ruffling feathers and cackling driving me nuts. The next day I went to feed them. I was puzzled. Neither the chickens nor the cow touched the food I gave them. The cows dripped saliva while the calves suckled. I went to get Dad. He wasn't that up on hanging out with the livestock. His nose wrinkled the minute he walked into the room, and his eyes were glued to the ground. But he took ginger steps around any dirt that I might have missed when I cleaned up, even though he wore knee-high muck boots. Dad wasn't sure what to make of the cows' behavior. They probably just have to adjust to this place, too. They'll be back to normal in a day or so. Later, I went back to check. The cows still stood there, panting and drooling. Their calves lay on their sides, still. I rested my hand on one. The fur was still soft, but the body was stiff and cold. The calves were dead. All of them. And it was too quiet in there, too quiet. I realized what was missing. Cackling. Inside the henhouse, I found all the chickens, unmoving and lifeless. I ran to get Dad, then struggled to keep up as we raced back. By then a cow was on her side. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he hissed. My mouth opened to defend myself, to tell him I'd done everything the way I was supposed to. I was afraid to speak. Dad held a hand to the cow's heaving flank. I realized his words were directed at her, not me. He grabbed a couple of stainless steel buckets from the stack. He put some water in one and a few handfuls of grain in the other and took them to his lab. I followed to watch him. He relied on a microscope and his other equipment. He readied the microscope and his other equipment and then set to work. Inspected first, the water ended up being fine. It was the same we all drank. I went to check on the cows and I decided to stay with them. One by one, they dropped to their forelegs, then fell onto their sides. I was with them through the afternoon. One by one, they died. Back in the lab, I found Dad deep in concentration. He didn't seem to notice me as he studied the information that compiled on his computer screen. At last, his analysis was complete. No, 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 no! Dad leaned on the computer, holding his head in his hands. Traces of rat poison. His exact next words escaped me. I do know he shouted something about the cows and swore a lot. I took all the dead chickens to the incinerator with the orange wheelbarrow, which I christened the hearse. Dad sliced up the large animals with equipment from the meat processing room. The grinding whine stayed in my head for days. I couldn't go back to sleep. My alarm hadn't gone off yet, so I stayed in bed and daydreamed, as I often did, about things I used to take for granted. The smell of Coco after her bath, the way she tore around the house, rolling on every carpet in sight, grunting. I felt her then, her body on top of me, her warmth seeping through the covers. She was my phantom limb. For 6 years, I tried not to dwell on thoughts of her or anyone else too long. It was better to separate the old world from the new. It was better to stay cold and detached. Actually, I was getting good at cold and detached. Too good. I shivered and pulled the covers up tight. I often wondered about the cows and how it could all have happened. Could one of the workers have sabotaged the food supplies? And the grow bulbs and hydroponics? Could someone have put fluorescent ones in their place on purpose? A disgruntled worker who knew the job was coming to an end? An envious worker, stiff, who hated the thought of his own family dying while the young Kakas clan lived out nuclear winter in luxury? I hid my face in my hands, rubbing away at the sleepiness. Dad had planned well, of course, but even he had made mistakes. I crunched my last tortilla chip when I was 11, swallowed my last Mountain Dew when I was 13. Peanut butter ran out when I was 14, the jelly soon after. We each learned to hoard. Underneath my bed, a dozen Snickers called to me. True, the one I ate on my birthday was white around the edges and tasted rather off. Still, I saved the rest. I liked knowing they were there. Dad had stockpiled tons, literally, of food, but even he couldn't extend the shelf life. Most canned goods were fresh for 3-4 years tops. Wheat and honey were the only two foods with indefinite shelf life. Trust me on that. The meat in the freezers became increasingly inedible. In year 3, we'd been vegetarian since I was 13. Not by choice. I'd have given a few body parts for a burger and fries. Sometimes when I thought about this place called Uncle Barney's we used to go to, I'd get a little choked up. They made these incredible Monte Cristo sandwiches with layers of smoked turkey and honey ham and cheddar and Swiss, drenched in beer batter, then deep fried. Nice, eh? Rich kid pines away for food and doesn't shed a tear for the brother he killed. My stomach growled then, at just the thought of meat. I resisted the temptation to reach under the bed for Snickers. Instead, I got up to do my Tai Chi. I began the motions. I tried. I couldn't stop thinking about the food. How food used to be fun. Not anymore. Meals had become scientific. Every bite like a mathematical equation, each integer bleeding together to create an adequate sum product solution. This bite and that equaled proper nutrition. My gaze fell to the oak dresser and the industrial-sized bottle of vitamins I took by the handful. No substitute for real food. They were close to expiring. We wouldn't starve as long as the honey and wheat lasted. Malnutrition could become an issue, inviting related ailments such as scurvy and rickets. Nice. My right calf muscle felt tight. I stopped to stretch. My hands needed the sinewy lower half of my leg. Of course, there was a safety net. MREs, meals ready to eat. Dad laid a huge stock, thousands, purchased from the military supply place. Way to go, Pops. My concentration was shot, so I gave up on Tai Chi and went to a pre-workout shower. Thanks to Dad's high-tech water heaters, at least we had plenty of that. I stepped in, hoping the water would wash away my thoughts. Didn't work. I didn't get it. How he could go through the entire planning process of the compound and then screw up the most important thing. I respected him for the effort, of course. Who else could have pulled this off? But still, to screw up something as basic as the food supplies? The blasted saga of the MREs wouldn't leave me alone. Stored at 60 degrees, they have a shelf life of 130 months, give or take a few. That would last for at least 10 years, stored at 60 degrees. The thermostat in the MRE storage room malfunctioned, rising to 90 degrees. It stayed there for over 6 weeks before anyone noticed. Stored at 90 degrees, MREs have a shelf life of 55 months. We began eating up the MREs while they were still good, good being a relative term. I suspected they were always crappy, even in their prime. Not much variation there. Macaroni hot dish, beef stew, chop suey. That was, however, variation in how they were prepared, as stated by the official instructions. I had read them so many times while I ate that they were ingrained in my mind. Place unopened pouch in warm water for 5 to 10 minutes. Unopened pouch may be laid on a warm surface. Lay unopened pouch in direct sunlight. Not much chance of that down here. Place unopened pouch inside your shirt. Allow your body temperature to warm your MRE. I was surprised they left out, place unopened pouch on ground and pee on it. As the water ran hot down my body, I had another thought. Could the thermostat in the MRE room have been sabotaged as well? Who would wish us such ill will? Stupid question. Billions of people. For no other reason than for all that we possessed, especially our survival. I switched off the water and stepped out, grabbing a towel. If someone had tampered with our food, They never could have imagined the depths we would sink to in order to remedy the situation. Because soon after the MRE disaster, Dad made a decision necessary for his family's survival, a decision a normal person could never have lived with, a decision I had to live with every day, a decision I had to think about, whether I wanted to or not, every time I walked by that yellow door.